Zelie, and I'm gonna read Grammy and Grandpa's story called The Legend of Ice Cream Land. What I'll be reading today is the first part that you already heard, okay? The very first part of the story, and we'll be adding more to it soon, and then I'll make another video. So here's part one, The Legend of Ice Cream Land. It was a cloudy morning. The birds were still chirping though, and Raggedy Crickles felt warm underneath his favorite blankets in his cuddly soft bed. His dog, Mr. Scruffles, was curled up near Raggedy's feet. Raggedy Crickles yawned and thought about getting up to start the day. Mr. Scruffles yawned too. It never took Raggedy Crickles very long to get ready. Every night, he simply crawled into bed, fully dressed. And every morning when he got up, he was instantly set to go, once he found his hat and brushed his teeth. Come on, Mr. Scruffles, it's high time we head out to get some water from the well. Mr. Scruffles yawned again, jumped off the bed, and shook his furry body from the tip of his nose to the tip of his tail, and he was all set to go too. The front door to their little home was only a few steps away. It made a loud creaking sound as Raggedy opened it. Mr. Scruffles sniffed the fresh morning air and ran outside ahead of Raggedy. Raggedy Crickles grabbed his trusty old wooden bucket, and the pair began to walk down the long, dusty road that ran in front of Raggedy's house. They walked over 2 hills and through one big grassy field before they came upon the water well. Scruffy let out a bark just as Raggedy noticed a young boy standing near the well. "Howdy," Raggedy said. "My name is Raggedy Crickles, and this here is my dog, Mr. Scruffles." The boy turned to face Raggedy. He said, "Hello, my name is Gray Sky, son of light." Gray Sky had skin that was much darker than Raggedy's. He had dark hair, he wore a deerskin coat and pants, and soft-looking shoes. He had something on his head that looked like the tail of a horse with 2 feathers sticking out of it. Raggedy said, "Nice to meet you, Gray Sky. I've never seen you before. What brings you to these parts?" "My family and I are traveling south," Gray Sky answered, "and we stopped here to rest for a few days." Although it was still early morning, the sun was shining bright and hot. "It's gonna be a warm one today," Raggedy said as he removed his worn hat from atop his head. Gray Sky cranked the handle on the well until the bucket of water reached the top. He dipped his small hands into the bucket. Water trickled through the cracks in his fingers. He drank the remaining water from his hands. It made Mr. Scruffles lick his chops, and he let out a pitiful bark. "Ruff!" "Are you thirsty, boy?" asked Raggedy. Gray Sky and Raggedy laughed as Mr. Scruffles began excitedly wagging his tail and jumping in circles. Gray Sky took the bucket from the well and put it on the grass where Mr. Scruffles lapped at it happily. "Nothing like a cool drink of water on a toasty morning," said Raggedy. "Yes," agreed Gray Sky, son of light, "but do you want to know my favorite way to cool down on a warm day like this?" Raggedy lifted his gaze from Mr. Scruffles' pink floppy tongue. He looked into the dark eyes of Gray Sky. "Is it ice cream?" asked Raggedy. "Ice cream," said Gray Sky. "Chocolate mint chip to be exact." "Funny thing you'd mention chocolate and chips," said Raggedy Crickles, "because my favorite is chocolate chip. Mr. Scruffles prefers vanilla. He and I have not had our breakfast yet, and a nice dish of ice cream would really hit the spot." "It sure would," said Gray Sky. "Have you heard of the legend of Ice Cream Land?" Raggedy removed his hat just as Mr. Scruffles finished his drink of water. "Yes, I have," he said, "but that's only a legend." "No, it's true," Gray Sky responded. "My grandfather used to tell stories about it. All of his grandchildren would gather around the campfire at dusk. We would listen to his tales of a secret place where the hills are made of ice cream, rivers of chocolate sauce run through the land, and fountains spray whipped cream into the air. He used to stand under those fountains as a boy, his mouth wide open. Whipped cream would fall from above in all the colors of the rainbow." Gray Sky continued, My grandfather is back home, but he whispered to me before we began this journey, he wanted me to find this magical place from his childhood. He said there's no other place like it on earth. He said there is an old man at the foot of the great mountain who can show us the way. Raggedy said the great mountain is at least a day's journey. I can show you the way there, but what about your family? Won't they miss you? Gray Sky replied, my parents left to sell deerskin in some of your towns. They won't be back for 2 days. I can go with you. Raggedy found himself excited at the thought of an unexpected adventure. He said, we better get started if we want to make it before nightfall. Come on, Mr. Scruffles. Let's stop back at my place and make some sandwiches to keep our strength up. Soon the trio of friends was on their adventure. Raggedy had a large handkerchief tied to the end of a stick. The stick rested on his shoulders. Inside the makeshift sack were several sandwiches. Gray Sky had several straps crisscrossed from one shoulder to another. The straps were attached to 3 large canteens of water. His pockets bulged with apples from Raggedy's tree and a couple of pieces of jerky for Mr. Scruffles. They traveled through fields, down dusty roads, alongside cool streams, past patches of wildflowers, and they climbed steep, grassy hills. They stopped at the bottom of one of those hills and sat beneath a huge oak tree. Raggedy gently untied the handkerchief from the big stick he'd been carrying. Gray Sky could already smell the scent of freshly baked cornbread. He realized his stomach was making grumbling noises as Raggedy handed him a sandwich made of roasted meat. The two enjoyed every bite and shared their scraps with their 4-legged companion. Mr. Scruffles chewed on his dried beef stick as Raggedy and Gray Sky chomped on the apples. They all drank water from the cool canteens, even Mr. Scruffles, who lapped at the water Raggedy poured into his cupped hand. Once their stomachs were full, they wrapped the remaining sandwiches in the handkerchief, tied the handkerchief to the stick, and started the last leg of their journey through a thick, dark forest. The forest floor was covered in pine needles and pine cones. Mr. Scruffles kept grabbing the pine cones between his teeth. He let out little growls and shook his head back and forth as if he'd caught something ferocious. They emerged from the forest just as the sun was setting low. Before them in silhouette was the great mountain at last. At the base of the great mountain, they could see a small light piercing the darkness with its glow. Gray Sky said, "There, we will find the old man." They headed towards the light. As they drew closer, they could hear the snap of burning twigs and grass. The light danced before them. Orange and blue flames were surrounded by a large circle of stones. The air smelled of smoky mysteries and crisp excitement. The old man was sitting in a rickety wooden chair near the fire. He was poking at the flames with a stick and shuffling pieces of wood from one place to another. He heard the footsteps of Raggedy and Gray Sky, and Mr. Scruffles let out a bark. Ruff! The old man raised his eyes and greeted the trio with a nod. Raggedy said, "Howdy, old-timer. We were told you can take us to Ice Cream Land." The old man said, "Well, you heard wrong. I'm an old man. I can't make that journey anymore." Raggedy looked at Gray Sky. Gray Sky looked at the old man. The old man looked up at the twinkling stars that suddenly began to peek out of the blanket of darkening sky. The friends were disappointed. Their journey may have been for nothing, but the old man sensed their sadness even though they hadn't said a word. "I said I can't go there," the old man continued, "but I can tell you the way. It's too late to go tonight. Your bunks are over there. Get some shut-eye. Ice Cream Land isn't going anywhere. It'll still be there tomorrow." Raggedy and Gray Sky were confused. What bunks? How could he possibly known they were coming? But sure enough, the old man had a blanket rolled out for each of them and pillows made of burlap sacks stuffed full of leaves. Gray Sky handed out apples from his pockets. Mr. Scruffles had another piece of dried beef as he rested at the end of Raggedy's makeshift bed. The four of them slept under the stars that night. by the campfire as Gray Sky and Raggedy dreamed of ice cream hills and chocolate rivers. Morning came quickly. Gray Sky and Raggedy were as excited as Mr. Scruffles to start the day's adventures. The old man was warming some stew over the campfire. He put some into tin cups and passed them out to the hungry group. Even Mr. Scruffles had his own tin cup full of steamy breakfast. As they ate, he said, "You're going to need to climb the north face of the mountain. Look for the rocky trail. It'll lead you around the mountain and take you into the valley on the other side. Smack in the center of that valley is the entrance to Ice Cream Land." Gray Sky was slipping on his moccasin shoes. Raggedy grabbed his stick that carried their leftover sandwiches. The old man cautioned them before they headed on their way. "Beware," he said. The three travelers stopped in their tracks. "Beware of what?" asked Raggedy. "Beware of the Froster," the old man exclaimed. Raggedy and Gray Sky looked at each other and questioned the old man in unison. "The Froster?" The old man explained. "The Froster lives there, you know, and he wants to keep all the ice cream for himself. He won't let anyone in, unless you can recite the poem." "What poem?" asked Gray Sky. "That's the only part I can't tell you," said the old man, "because no one knows. The Froster makes the rules. If you get lucky and you get the poem right, he'll let you in. Once you're in, you can enjoy all the ice cream you want, any flavor, chocolate, chocolate chip, chocolate mint chip, vanilla, it's all there. The hills are actually made of ice cream and there are toppings. Sprinkles grow on trees. It's the most magical place you'll ever see." The three were getting so hungry for ice cream they could almost taste it. They set out to climb the north face of the mountain, which was no easy task. The mountain was steep. There were times Gray Sky had to scale some rocks while carrying Mr. Scruffles. Then he would break off a strong branch from a tree and hold it out to help pull Raggedy up to the next flat ledge. After a few more hours of walking and climbing, they discovered the rocky trail. The old man hadn't told them the rocks would glisten like silver and gold, but they did. No other rocky trail looked like this one. They were certain they were on the right path. Mr. Scruffles ran alongside the rocky trail because the shimmering rocks bothered his paws. There was soft grass on either side, and Mr. Scruffles couldn't seem to decide if he wanted to run on the right side or the left side, so he kept switching. Finally, the rocky trail ended and the valley began. The grass in the valley was so long it swung back and forth in the breeze. Pink and purple flowers sprung up here and there. A stream ran along the edge of the grass. Mr. Scruffles was already up to his ankles in water, chasing something as he splashed along, and the air smelled sweet as candy. Gray Sky pointed towards the middle of that valley, and he automatically began moving in that direction. Soon Raggedy followed, with Mr. Scruffles bringing up the rear. They all broke into a run at the same time. The thought of the ice cream gave them energy, even after their long, difficult journey. The center of the valley didn't seem to have a door or a gate or anything at all. Gray Sky and Raggedy looked up, they looked down, they looked left and right, but they couldn't find anything that looked like an entrance. "Who goes there?" they heard a squeaky, high-pitched voice ask from out of nowhere. Raggedy answered, "It's Raggedy Crickles, Gray Sky, Son of Light, and Mr. Scruffles." "What poem do you have to tell me?" the voice asked. Gray Sky answered the invisible asker, "Well, we don't know the poem. Can you tell us where to find it?" The voice simply laughed. "Ha ha 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 ha! I can't tell you where to find it, silly boy. It's in a place I could never go, and I'm in a place you can never go unless you recite the poem. Just one will do. I'll wait." Raggedy and Gray Sky began whispering to one another. "What poems do you know?" Raggedy asked Gray Sky. Gray Sky could only think of one poem. "How about Mary Had a Little Lamb?" "That won't do," the voice interrupted. He let out a heavy sigh. "I'll give you a hint if I must. The poem is already inside you." Raggedy Crickles cleared his throat and began making up a poem. My dog is Mr. Scruffles. I may dress him in ruffles. Gray Sky had never heard such an awful poem, so he took over from there. But dogs don't wear lace. It would be a disgrace. This air smells so sweet, not like stinky old feet. Oh, Gray Sky couldn't believe he'd added something so silly to the poem. Raggedy thought Gray Sky might ruin their chances of getting into Ice Cream Land by making up poems about smelly feet. So Raggedy Crickles took over yet again. And that is part 1 of our story. And soon I'll be letting you know all about what happens in part 2. I love you. Bye. Oh, you know what? Every time Grandma does something, I have to put something on my head. And I have something here. I'm not sure what it is, but I think it will work for a hat.